Let's open up the discussion to our panel now. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by a former U.S. ambassador to Yemen, Gerry Feierstein. In Sanaa, we have pro-Houthi journalist Hussain Albukhaiti. In Cairo, Afrah Nasser. She's the editor-in-chief of the Sanaa Review newspaper. And with me here in the studio is Yemen's former health minister, Najeeb Saeed Ghanem, who's now a member of Islah, a Yemeni opposition party that supports the Saudi-led coalition. I thank you all for joining us. There's a lot to get through here, but the most pressing news is that there's trouble in the south now. So, Najeeb, let me start with you. We have the secessionists who now have demands. They took over major sites. There was terrible fighting. We saw the alliance between the Houthis and Saleh collapse. Are Hadis alliances now collapsing as well?
Hopefully not.
You don't seem convinced.
No, I don't think so. And the good news is now just everything went into settlement, and there is a very strong intervention by the Saudis and also to some extent the Emirates to settle out and also to sort out all diversities, if I can say, between some partners within the umbrella of the legitimate power in Yemen. Also, really, we are very sorry about all these casualties and victims really went during the previous, clashes between the legitimate forces and also the southern activists, led by Idrous al-Zubaydi. Really, this is, what can I just say? It's really avoidable, war. We can avoid
but
it.
But Idrous al-Zubaydi, he was saying this is the fault of Hadi's government, saying that there's corruption and no services and so on. And even now, even though they've ceded some of the strategic points back, they still have these demands. The new wildcard into all of this is they say we want our own country back again. We want a separate country. So this is not going to go away anytime soon, is it?
Within this scenario, within this, very critical situation now, Yemen is suffering. And we can't just say that there is a distinct part who can take all these, responsibility for mistakes. So many partners really playing, and also they are carrying, mutual, responsibility of all this scenario and suffering of the people there. Idrous al-Zubaydi himself, before he was the governor of Aden, and just spent 1.5 years. But really, there is so many difficulties. Funds is not that enough for people just to cover and to store, at least the minimum, level of services. But and also Houthis as in the north.
So you're saying, you're saying it was hard for them to do this anyway at a time of war.
No, I admit that we have a weak government, and also there is so many mistakes there, and weak, individual representative of the government, and also they just miss so many times, waste so many times. In the legitimate part, yes, I can admit that there are so many mistakes, but also in the other part, also they can carry, reasonable mistakes.
So let's talk to the former ambassador, Gerry Feierstein. What we have is Aden being almost a war zone within a war zone, or a civil war within a civil war. How dangerous is the situation, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's an extremely unfortunate circumstance that we're in right now. We were in the process, of course, we are in the process of identifying a new special envoy. Ismail old Sheikh Ahmed is going to step down next month. A new envoy will be appointed. There was an opportunity, I think, to try to get the political dialogue back on track and to see whether or not the parties are ready to come back to the table and try to work out an arrangement to end the conflict and begin the process of restoring security, stability, and economic activity to the country. What we have now in Aden is a situation that really raises questions about the credibility of the Hadi government to actually lead the negotiations. We saw in December the collapse, as you mentioned, of the Houthi-Saleh alliance. That has created issues in terms of who speaks for that side of the issue. Now we have these questions. It's good to see that the Saudis and the Emiratis, after some hesitation, have come in now and put their finger very heavily on the scales to tip back towards the legitimate government. That's important, but it's still is going to be a complicating factor for the new special envoy when he tries to meet the parties and get the talks going.
Afrah Nasser, is this the last thing that Yemen needs right now? The STC saying we want our old country back?
Well, before I answer your question, I think it's very interesting that your program is describing what's happening in south of Yemen as secession, instead of calling it, the separatists wanting to separate or independence for the south. I think that's very telling about how it's very complicated what's happening in the south. But to be honest, like what's happening right now, it's not a shock to me. It has been in the making, not only since 2007 when the Hirak started in south of Yemen, but honestly since the unification in 1990. Following the unification, which is quite, it's a young unification, young period of the unification, about 20 years old, and what we're seeing that it has failed big time. The integration between the north and the south has failed, not only as the unfolding events in front of our eyes, but even, in 2011, when the uprising happened, that when it was like a very defining moment for the South to get their independence, or to just not remain in that failing unification. So I think what's happening has been boiling for many, many years, and not today. But what is interesting these days is that it is a civil war within a civil war. And as there are external influences coming more and more into the already or original civil war in Yemen, coming with new different interests, like what's happening with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that tend definitely to prolong the war and making it more and more complicated.
Right.
So it's very hard to see how the secession will happen, because technically it's like trying to build a country or to build a house in midst of a storm.
Right. And let me ask Hussain, up north, is this playing into the hands of the Houthis? Does trouble in the south for Hadi and his allies mean that it opens up more space for the Houthis to strengthen themselves in the north?
No, the Houthi, they are really strong in the north, and they don't need anything like to happen in the south to strengthen their position. What's happening in the south, it will affect and damage the whole country, because what's happening now is that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi coalition, they actually have made a plan, and they are making the Southerner people to fight each other, because this is a British tactic called divide and conquer. And they show you as well that the main goal of the Saudi-led coalition was not, as they say, to bring Hadi legitimacy back. We've seen what's happening to this so-called legitimacy. They want them to fight each other. First of all, they want Yemen to split into two, and as well they want the south to split into many areas. If the southern people keep fighting each other, this will strengthen Saudi position in Hadramaut. This will as well have strengthened the United Arab Emirates in Bab el-Mandab and Mion Island they occupy, and as well they are occupying Socotra Island, and this is the main goal. They want the fight to keep in Aden and area around Aden, because they don't want Aden to thrive. They don't want situation to be secured in Aden, because Aden port, if it succeeded to be back and to be better than it was, so that it will threaten Dubai, and this was clearly.
Okay, you make some interesting points. Let's ask the former ambassador, a man who was at the table with the power brokers in the past. Should we dismiss this as a conspiracy theory, or might there be some substance to it, given that there were reports that Boris Johnson, the UK Foreign Secretary, reportedly proposed giving the southern separatists 50% representation in a joint confederation of the north of the country? So might there be greater machinations at play here, or is it nonsense?
Well, I don't think it's nonsense, and I think, as your earlier commentator mentioned, this has been an issue, this issue of a division between the North and the South. It's been an issue really ever since the country was united in 1990. There have been those who proposed that the country should be redivided. Of course, there was a civil war in 1994 over that very issue. And there are a number of people, both inside of Yemen and outside of Yemen, who believe that the North and the South are two really separate entities. When we were in the process of working with the Yemeni parties to try to develop what became the GCC Transition Initiative, the issue of uniting the North and South was very much at the center of the discussions that the Yemeni parties were having. And as part of that transition program, there was a national dialogue that was intended very heavily to focus on the North-South question and to try to come up with a way forward that would allow the two sides to continue within a unified structure, within a unified state, to achieve a higher degree of autonomy. So this is something that's been on the table for a long time. And in fact, I think that there's sympathy, certainly in the international community and as well as among Yemeni political leaders, to see that the South should have the ability to take control of major aspects of the economic and social fabric of that part of the country, but to maintain it within a unified Yemen, which is important for the security and stability of Yemen, of the region, and in fact of the world.
Right. Najeeb, for those who say that the longer that this war tumbles along, the less legitimacy Hadi has because he's out of the country and the place is falling apart. Is that fair?
Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you. But really, to be honest, really, what we are, very interested in is if we can just think about how we can set up some sort of strategic agreement between the big players within this Yemen arena. Speaking about Saudis, about the Emirates, and also about the legitimate power in Yemen, and also other partners, if we can expand the interest, expand the benefits, rather than just going deeply.
But would you have the Houthis at the table?
Yes, providing just one condition, that they should accept the legitimate power and put out their hands about the heavy weapons and also about controlling the state, infrastructure in Sanaa and elsewhere. Yes, referring to the three reference, ITT of what the legitimate are demands. Yes, why not? We will be very happy to see them there, but just they should accept all these three references.
So let's, hold on. Let me ask Hussain for a second. Hussain, isn't that reasonable, those demands on the Houthis to come to the table, put away your weapons and come and talk? Doesn't it make sense?
Why you asking one party or one group or whatever you call it to drop their weapons and to come to the table? The 2216 insists on the implementation of all agreements that happened before, including the national dialogue, which national dialogue in one of its article has called all parties, including the Islah, the GBC, Ansarullah the Houthi, and other group to hand over their weapons. So now during a war, to ask only one side to hand over their weapons, where there is war against this group, there is a blockade, there is an attempt to downfall this group and to eliminate this group. I don't think that anyone will be that stupid to accept to hand over your weapons and then go to talk. As soon as you hand over your weapon, you lost the war. They're not gonna even accept you to go to talk with them. And this is clearly in any conflict. No one hand over his weapons unless there is an agreement first.
Okay. Afrah, let me ask you, we have UNHCR who had to suspend their operations because the port in Aden was blockaded and there was fighting, right? Terrible fighting in Aden. Water supply was cut in a country with cholera. We're hearing from Hussain, they're saying, why would you want to actually stop one side from fighting and then call them to the table? Why doesn't the other side also stop? People don't seem willing to sit at the table for now. But the situation is horrendous and people continue to suffer. How much worse does it have to get, Afrah, before all the power brokers decide that they actually need to talk?
For my family in Yemen, for my friends, for a lot of people that I know who are coming from Yemen to Egypt, who I am meeting here, I'm hearing really awful stories. It's like hell, technically. What makes the situation very, very grim is that while you have this huge humanitarian crisis, there are raging war. Like all warring parties are still thirsty for more bloodshed. And that makes it really impossible to see how there is any way out of this. But what is very interesting that right now, what's keeping Yemen's united is the war itself. As you can tell, there are divisions between what the Saudis want, what the Emiratis want. They're backing the Hirak. The Hirak statement calls for, their own independence, but at the same time, they're willing to continue fighting the Houthis in the north. It's very kind of confused political position. But what is very clear that all these warring parties are keeping Yemen united because the war is still going. After that, we don't know what will happen. Honestly, I think Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi is irrelevant to the discussion. He's becoming more of a burden on the coalition more than any useful political leader. So I think what is going to happen in the coming, let's say, weeks or days would be defining and the prospect of the ongoing war.
Yeah, so many conflicts within the conflict and no end in sight. It's quite depressing at the moment. Unfortunately, I wish we had some better news coming out of Yemen. We'll be watching it very closely. But for the moment, Afrah Nasser, Ambassador Gerry Feierstein, Hussain Albukhaiti and Najeeb Ghanem, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.